This video is sponsored by War Thunder. In the year 2000, archaeologist Mark Abbe was working at an excavation in the ancient Greek city of Aphrodisias. Thousands of sculpture fragments were recovered and delivered to archaeological depots, pending their exhibition in museums. The statues they dug up were pure white, an aesthetic that continues to inspire our modern architectural and artistic styles to this day. Decades later, Mark Abbe visited one of the archaeological depots, and upon examining the statues closer, he was shocked to find spots of color on them. Red pigment on lips, black pigment on hair, gilding on limbs. This discovery put classical statues and architecture in a completely new light. Could it be that we were completely wrong about our perception of the classical era? Worse, apparently archaeologists and museum curators have been scrubbing off this paint residue from statues and architectural elements before presenting them to the public. In this New Yorker article, Abbe is quoted as follows: "Imagine you've got an intact lower body of a nude male statue lying there on the depot floor covered in dust. You look at it up close and you realize the whole thing is covered in bits of gold leaf. Oh my god, the visual appearance of these things was just totally different from what I've seen in the standard textbooks, which had only black and white plates in any case." This was a sensational discovery. It turns out that our perception of classical art and architecture was indeed completely and utterly wrong. Researchers got to work to correct this historical misunderstanding, and when they published their findings, everyone celebrated them and the work they did. Thank you for watching. No wait, I'm sorry, they started getting death threats from the far right. What's going on here? Why did this seemingly innocent discovery cause such an uproar? Let's find out. Ancient statues first started getting excavated on a large scale in the Renaissance era, when there was a great revival in interest towards everything classical. There was also a newfound scientific drive to label and categorize everything. Additionally, there was the transatlantic slave trade. The intersection of these three things produced a bizarre vortex ancient statues and architecture got sucked into, and we continue to suffer the consequences to this day. And so if we consider... sorry about the noise, there is a battle going on, courtesy of War Thunder, the sponsor of today's video. War Thunder brings the most robust, all-encompassing vehicle combat ever, featuring more than 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships in online, player versus player combined arms battles. The vehicle roster spans more than 100 years, from the 1920s all the way to present-day modern vehicles. Each of them is detailed perfectly, down to the last bolt, which provides for fun and immersive gameplay. Instead of traditional hit points, the vehicles use dynamic damage models, meaning they take damage on their specific components or crew members, which determines whether you survive a hit or not. Upon damage or destruction, a damage X-ray will show you exactly what happened to your vehicle. My favorite class of vehicles is anti-air. Nice jet you got there. What a handsome helicopter. Have I shown you my anti-air missiles? I really appreciate how ground units can actually fight back against aerial threats. It adds another welcome layer of complexity to the game. Also, the fire and explosion effects are just pretty damn good. War Thunder is available for free on PC, Xbox and PlayStation, both on the latest and previous console generations. Use my link in the description to start playing and get a large free bonus pack of multiple premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters and more. Thank you for checking out War Thunder. They support me making more content for you. Now, back to the video. So what the hell is up with this color business? How do we go from an intriguing archaeological discovery to neo-Nazi death threats? To understand what happened, we need to go forward in time. The year is 3023. Centuries after the climate catastrophe, archaeologists are excavating the ruins of Western civilization when they make a sensational discovery. They unearth the remains of an ancient DVD store, where they find a well-preserved piece of disc-based media. According to linguists, the title refers to some sort of ruler of finger-based jewelry. Miraculously, the video is mostly intact, though there is no sound. This causes a global sensation, as the society of 3023 happens to be going through a Western civilization revival period, where they rediscover old Western culture and incorporate aspects of it into their own. They are also strangely obsessed with height and consider tall people to be inherently superior to short people. Work begins to decipher the meaning of this disc-based media. After months of studies and analyses, researchers present their conclusion. This ancient piece of media is about the superiority of tall people. Obviously, right? A group of short people set out on a quest where they constantly need the help of tall people. As the short people bumble around the landscape, hapless and tiny, the tall people wage all the important civilizational battles in the background. They also discover the ruins of a short civilization in the mountains, having been decimated by superior, tall adversaries. Though the short people do win in the end, scholars associate this unexpected twist with the growing self-hatred of Western tall people in the time period. It is commonly understood that Western civilization fell due to the importing of short people from abroad. In this era of decline, tall and short people were allowed to marry, producing inferior offspring. Movements associated with height pride became frowned upon, and tall people increasingly suffered from height guilt. This ultimately doomed Western civilization. As the inferior short people were allowed to infiltrate centers of power, they mismanaged the government, causing it to falter and then collapse. Thankfully, the civilization of 3023 had embraced height supremacy in time before history could repeat itself. What you've just listened to was an example of misrepresenting the cultural products of a past era to suit contemporary ideological needs. It's a way of falsifying the past in service of the present, whether deliberate or accidental, which is exactly what happened with ancient buildings and statues. See, thinkers of the Renaissance period had some relevant ideological problems, discrepancies they couldn't quite resolve, such as humans are supposed to be the highest form of life, the crown jewel of God's creation, and yet we're selling our fellow humans into slavery and working them to death in the colonies for profit. How do these two things fit together? They don't, right? It's either one or the other. Or so people thought, until the emergence of scientific racism. Born at the intersection of the slave trade, the drive to label and categorize things, and the new interest in the classical, scientific racism breached the aforementioned contradiction. Turns out, once they arbitrarily categorized black people as inherently inferior to whites, suddenly it's more acceptable, even preferable, to keep them as slaves. We're not committing abhorrent crimes by debasing God's crown achievement. Oh no, we're sponsoring the backwards blacks, lifting them up from their primitive ways and giving them proper, civilized work in the Americas. So really, they should thank us for what we do to them. This sounds completely ludicrous, but this was the actual Christian justification used to condone slavery. And this is where classical architecture and statues came into play. Whiteness was, and in many cases still is, associated with positive attributes: purity, nobility, grace, elegance, civilizedness, and so on. And oh, would you look at that, this past era of greatness is of that same color. Importantly, we white Europeans are also of the same color. Moreover, our facial proportions are closer to the ideal depicted by the statues, while blacks are farther away from it, meaning we are the superior ones. And this does sound silly when spelled out like that, but that's racism for you. From that point on, the white statues and buildings weren't just intriguing artifacts from a past era. They became mascots of white supremacy and tools for justifying racism. And there is a rich literature out there from the era detailing the racial hierarchy with statues as the gold standard. This hierarchy went ancient statues, Caucasians, Asians and Mongols, black Africans, monkeys, and then dogs. Yeah. So, alright, statues became symbols of white supremacy. Isn't this conclusion a bit far-fetched though? Not really. If you've ever encountered white nationalists in your life, you might have noticed them using the white statues as their symbols. That's no accident. Identity Europa, an openly white supremacist movement, particularly likes using them in their promotional material. And if you visit online circles where white supremacists are present, you'll notice quite a few white statue profile pictures and forum avatars. So yes, as we can see, white statues and the perceived whiteness of the classical era became part of the identity of modern white supremacists. So when Sarah E. Bond, professor at the University of Iowa, published an essay about the ancient era actually being quite colorful, she started receiving a flurry of death threats from white supremacists. Now, alright, I'm not a Nazi, you might say, but I still like the blank statues better. They look more majestic and elaborate, whereas many of the colorful statues look outright cheap. And that's fair enough, we all have different tastes. In some cases, where we don't have enough paint residue on the statue, we cannot fully replicate the layers, leading to very basic colorings without too many details or shading. Sure. But consider this, those statues for the most part are not contemporary art pieces, they are historical art pieces. And the primary reason we look at historical art pieces is not to look at beautiful things, but to look at history. And if history means colorful statues, then I want to see colorful statues, not our whitewashed, falsified idea of them. Case in point, I'm sure many people would prefer the Mona Lisa half-naked, but that's no reason to put tits on her, is it? Because that would be a falsification of the original. So if a historical art piece also happens to be beautiful to the contemporary observer, that's just a bonus really. The main objective remains historical accuracy. Imagine if someone took a prehistoric cave painting and started erasing the parts they didn't like to make it look nicer. Or just remember those failed Spanish amateur restoration attempts. I'm sure the artisans thought that the St. George statue would look nicer with that color scheme, but thankfully in the end actual professionals restored the statue to its original colors. And there was also the famous Monkey Christ and that fetal alcohol syndrome Mary. As ridiculous as these look, they are no different from what we did to classical statues when we scratched the paint off them. It's a ham-fisted, crude attempt to fix them, while in reality doing nothing but ruining the original and thereby falsifying history. I personally prefer the colorful statues because if they are fully replicated, they look simply awesome. And even if they aren't, at least it's as close to the original as possible. That way we can gain a real window into the classical era, not some bullshit whitewashed make-believe invented by 17th century pro-slavery eugenicists. But this false idea of a pure, white classical era got stuck in our culture, and it ended up producing some highly symbolic and famous buildings that are based on a complete misunderstanding of said era. For example, take a look at this picture I took at a museum. It's a funeral urn, and as you can see it's painted, and there is also the ancient equivalent of graffiti on it. And here I don't want to let Hollywood off the hook either. They too contribute to the whitewashing of the classical era, though I doubt it's on purpose. They are the same victims of this false perception as the rest of us. As a side note, they do the same thing with the medieval era. So instead of the colorful buildings, clothing and so on, we have everything dark, washed out, muddy and covered in shit. All this to say we could seriously use some historical readjustment. But today Today we have gotten to the point, or rather the global far right has gotten to the point, where if someone suggested restoring ancient statues as best as we can to their original colors, it would be denounced as woke nonsense. Degenerate creations meant to groom children into LGBT ideology with their aggressive colors or something. And don't believe me? We're at the point where a black kid playing Charlie in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory musical is woke, apparently. We really are in a vortex of far-right psychosis. After Bud Light did an ad with a trans woman, we had heroic, anti-woke warriors destroying beer at the local supermarket, which ended up being the wrong brand of beer. We got Kanye West becoming a Trump supporter and then declared DEFCON 3 on Jews. I could sit here all day and list off all the bizarre things prominent conservatives have been up to just in the last few months. But I think we can all agree that this isn't normal. This is absolutely deranged. To the average person, all of this is psychotic. And since they're going this far into crazy land, it's not hard to see that if we tried to correct our perceptions of the ancient era, they would go absolutely ballistic. So far only the neo-Nazis did so, but just wait until MAGA Republicans discover this issue and turn it into another goddamn culture war talking point. Because apparently everything has to be culture war nowadays. Well, except for War Thunder, which isn't culture war yet. I mean, can you imagine? Ah, you mean helicopters, that's woke. Quick reminder, use my link in the description to start playing to get a large free bonus pack and join the fight. But if you bring out a plane or a helicopter, I will nail you, so keep that in mind. So then, those of us who aren't affected by this deranged anti-woke culture war psychosis can just go to a museum and appreciate the artistic choices of people from the classical era, like normal people do. Thank you for watching. Longtime viewers might note that this is the second remake of my original video about statues. The first remake was just a graphical update of the original video, but I wasn't happy with the script itself. I left too much space for the "but I like statues without the colors better" argument, which this newest version has hopefully addressed. And I can't wait for all the intelligent, insightful emails I'm going to get once I publish this video. Thank you for watching once again, and if you like my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and I'll be seeing you next time.